The Divine Maya, from the book The Life Divine, written by Sri Aurobindo way back in 1914. The Divine Maya. By the names of the Lord and hers, they shaped and measured the force of the Mother of Light, wearing might after might of that force as a robe. The lords of Maya shaped out form in this being. The masters of Maya shaped all by his Maya. The fathers who has divine vision set him within as a child that is to be born. Rig Veda. Existence that acts and creates by the power and from the pure delight of its conscious being is the reality that we are, the self of all our modes and moods, the cause, object, and goal of all our doing, becoming, and creating. As the poet, artist, or musician, when he creates, does really nothing but develop some potentiality in his unmanifested self into a form of manifestation, and as the thinker, statesman, mechanist only bring out into a shape of things that which lay hidden in themselves, was themselves is still themselves when it is cast into form, so is it with the world and the eternal. All creation or becoming is nothing but this self manifestation. Out of the seed there evolves that which is already in the seed, pre existent in being, predestined in its will to become, pre-arranged in the delight of becoming. The original plasm held in itself in force of being the resultant organism. For it is always that secret, burdened, self-knowing force which labors under its own irresistible impulse to manifest the form of itself with which it is charged. Only the individual who creates or develops out of himself make a distinction between himself, the force that works in him, the material in which he works. In reality, the force is himself. The individualized consciousness which it instrumentalizes is himself. The material which it uses is himself. The reluctant form is himself. In other words, it is one existence, one force, one delight of being which concentrates itself at various points, each of says of each. This is I, and works in it by a various play of self force for a various play of self formation. What it produces is itself and can be nothing other than itself. It is working out a play, a rhythm, a development of its own existence, force of consciousness, and delight of being. Therefore, whatever comes into the world seeks nothing but this: to be, to arrive at the intended form, to enlarge its self existence in that form, to develop, manifest, increase, realize infinitely the consciousness and the power that is in it, to have the delight of coming into manifestation, the delight of the form of being, the delight of the rhythm of consciousness, the delight of the play of force, and to aggrandize and perfect that delight by whatever means is possible in whatever direction, through whatever idea of itself may be suggested to it by the existence, the conscious force, the delight active within its deepest being. And if there is any goal, any completeness towards which things tend, it can only be the completeness in the individual and in the whole, which the individuals constitute of its self existence, of its power and consciousness, and of its delight of being. But such completeness is not possible in the individual consciousness concentrated within the limits of the individual formation. Absolute completeness is not feasible in the finite because it is alien to the self conception of the finite. Therefore, the only final goal possible is the emergence of the infinite consciousness in the individual. It is his recovery of the truth of himself by self knowledge and by self realization. The truth of the infinite is being. The infinite is consciousness. The infinite is delight repossessed as his own self and reality, of which the finite is only a mask and an instrument for various expression. Thus, by the very nature of the world play as it has been realized by Satchidananda in the vastness of his existence, extended as space and time, we have to conceive first of an involution and self-absorption of conscious being into the density and infinite divisibility of substance, for otherwise there can be no finite variation. Next, an emergence of the self imprisoned force into formal being, living being, thinking being, and finally a release of the form thinking being into the free realization of itself as the one and the infinite at play in the world, and by the release, its recovery of the boundless existence, consciousness, bliss that even now it is secretly, really, and eternally. This triple movement is the whole key of the world enigma. It is so that the ancient and eternal truth of Vedanta receives into itself and illumines, justifies, and shows us all the meaning of the modern and phenomenal truth of evolution in the universe. And it is so only that this modern truth of evolution, which is the old truth of the universal developing itself successively in time, seen opaquely through the study of force and matter, can find its own full sense and justification by illuminating itself with the light of the ancient and eternal truth still preserved for us in the Vedantic scriptures. To this mutual self discovery and self illumination by the fusion of the old Eastern and the new Western knowledge, the thought of the world is already turning. Still, when we have found that all things are Satchidananda, all has not yet been explained. We know the reality of the universe, we do not yet know the process by which that reality has turned itself into this phenomenon. We have the key of the riddle, we have still to find the lock in which it will turn, for this existence conscious force delight does not work directly or with a sovereign irresponsibility like a magician building up worlds and universe by the mere fiat of its word. We perceive a process, we are aware of a law. It is true that this law, when we analyze it, seems to resolve itself into an equilibrium of the play of forces and a determination of that play into fixed lines of work by the accident of development and the habit of past realized energy. But this apparent and secondary truth is final to us only so long as we conceive of force solely. When we perceive that force is a self expression of existence, we are bound to perceive only that this line which force has taken correspond to some self-truth of that existence which governs and determines its constant curve and destination. And since consciousness is the matter is the nature of the original existence and the essence of its force. This truth must be a self perception in conscious being, and this determination of the line taken by force must result from a power of self directive knowledge inherent in consciousness, which enables it to guide its own force inevitably along the logical line of the original self perception. It is then a self determining power in the universal consciousness, a capacity in self awareness of infinite existence to perceive a certain truth in itself and direct its force of creation along the line of what truth which has presided over the cosmic manifestation. But why should we interpose any special power or faculty between the infinite consciousness itself and the result of its working? May not this self-awareness of the infinite range freely creating form which afterwards remain in play so long as there is not the fiat that bids them cease? Even as the old Semitic revelation tells us, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. But when we say God said, "Let there be light," we assume the act of a power of consciousness which determines light out of everything else that is not light. And when we say, "and there was light," we presume a directing faculty, an active power corresponding to the original perceptive power which brings out the phenomenon and working out. Light, according to the line of the original perception, prevents it from being overpowered by all the infinite possibilities that are other than itself. Infinite consciousness in its infinite action can produce only infinite result to settle upon a fixed truth or order of truths and build a world in conformity with that which is fixed. Demands a selective faculty of knowledge commissioned to shape finite appearance out of the infinite reality. The power was known to the Vedic seers by the name of Maya. Maya meant for them the power of infinite consciousness to comprehend, contain in itself and measure out, that is to say, to form, for form is delimitation, name and shape out of the vast illimitable truth of infinite existence. It is by Maya that static truth of essential being become ordered truth of active being, or to put it in more metaphysical language, out of the supreme being in which all is all, without barrier of separative consciousness, emerges the phenomenal being in which all is in each and each is in all, for the play of existence with existence, consciousness with consciousness, force with force, delight with delight. This play of all in each and each is all is concealed at first from us by the mental play or the illusion of Maya, which persuades each that he is in all, but not all in him, and that he is in all as a separate being, not as a being always inseparated one with the rest of existence. Afterwards, we have to emerge from this error into the supramental play or the truth of Maya, where the each and the all coexist in the inseparable unity of one truth and the multiple symbol. The lower, present, and deluding mental Maya has first to be embraced, then to be overcome, for it is God's play with division and darkness and limitation, desire and strife and suffering, in which he subjects himself to the force that has come out of himself, and by her obscure suffer himself to be obscured. The other Maya, concealed by this mental, has to be overpassed, then embraced, for it is God's play of the infinities of existence, the splendors of knowledge and the glories of force mastered, and the ecstasies of love illimitable, where he emerges out of the hold of force, holds her instead, and fulfills in her illumine that for which she went out from him at the first. This distinction between the lower and the higher Maya is the link in thought and in cosmic fact which the pessimistic and illusionist philosophies miss or neglect. To them, the mental Maya, or perhaps an overmind, is the creatrix of the world, and a world created by mental Maya would indeed be an inexplicable paradox and a fixed yet floating nightmare of conscious existence which could neither be classed as an illusion nor as a reality. We have to see that the mind is only an intermediate term between the creative governing knowledge and the soul imprisoned in its works. Satchidananda, involved by one of his lower movements in the self-oblivious absorption of force that is lost in the form of his own workings, returned towards himself out of the self-oblivion. Mind is only one of his instrument in the descent and the ascent. It is an instrument of the descending creation, not the secret creatrix, a transitional stage in the ascent, not our high original source and the consummate term of cosmic existence. The philosophies also the philosophies which recognize mind alone as the creator of the worlds or accept an original principle with mind as the only mediator between it and the forms of the universe may be divided into the purely nominal and idealistic. The purely nominal recognize in the cosmos only the work of the mind, thought, idea. But idea may be purely arbitrary and have no essential relation to any real truth of existence, or such truth, if it exists, may be regarded as a mere absolute aloof from all relations and irreconcilable with a world of relations. The idealistic interpretation supposes a relation between the truth behind and the conceptive phenomenon in front, a relation which is not merely that of an antinomy and opposition. The view I am presenting goes further than idealism. It sees the creative idea as a real idea, that is to say, a power of conscious force expressive of real being, born out of real being and partaking of its nature, and neither a real of the void nor a weaver of fictions. It is conscious reality throwing itself into mutable forms of its own imperishable and immutable substance. The world is therefore not a figment of conception in the universal mind, and a conscious birth of that which is beyond mind into forms of itself. A truth of conscious being supports these forms and expresses itself in them, and the knowledge corresponding to the truth thus expressed reigns as a supramental truth consciousness, organizing real ideas in a perfect harmony before they are cast into a mental, vital, material mold. Mind, life, body are an inferior consciousness and a partial expression which strives to arrive in the mold of a various evolution at the superior expression of itself already existent in the beyond mind. That which is in the beyond mind is the ideal which in its own condition it is laboring to realize. From our ascending point of view, we may say that the real is behind all that exists. It expresses itself immediately in an ideal which is a harmonized truth of itself. The ideal throws out a phenomenal reality of variable conscious being which inevitably drawn towards its own essential reality tries at last to recover its entirely, whether by a violent leap or normally through the ideal which puts it forth. It is this that explains the imperfect reality of human existence as seen by the mind, the instinctive aspiration in the mental being towards a perfectibility ever beyond itself towards the concealed harmony of the ideal and the supreme surge of the spirit beyond the ideal to the transcendental. The very facts of our consciousness, its constitution, and its necessity presuppose such a triple order. They negate the dual and irreconcilable antithesis of a mere absolute to a mere relativity. Mind is not sufficient to explain existence in the universe. Infinite consciousness must first translate itself into infinite faculty of knowledge, or as we call it from our point of view, omniscience. But mind is not a faculty of knowledge, nor an instrument of omniscience. It is a faculty for the seeking of knowledge, for expressing as much as it can gain of it in certain forms of a relative thought, and for using it towards certain capacities of action. Even when it finds it does not possess, it only keeps a certain fund of current coin of truth, not truth itself, in the bank of memory to draw upon according to its needs. For mind is that which does not know, which tries to know, and which never knows except as in a glass darkly. It is the power which interprets truth of universal existence for the practical use of certain order of things. It is not the power which knows and guides the existence, and therefore it cannot be the power which created or manifested it. But if we suppose an infinite mind which could be free from our limitation, then at least might well be the creator of the universe. But such a mind would be something quite different from the definition of mind as we know it. It would be something beyond mentality. It would be the supramental truth. An infinite mind constituted in the terms of mentality as we know it could only create an infinite chaos, a vast class of chance, accident, vicissitude wandering towards an indeterminate end after which it would be always tentatively groping and aspiring. An infinite, omniscient, omnipotent mind would not be mind at all but supramental knowledge. Mind, as we know it, is a reflective mirror which receives presentations or images of a pre existent truth or fact, either external to or at least vaster than itself. It represents to itself from moment to moment the phenomenon that is or has been. It possesses also the faculty of constructing in itself possible images other than those of the actual fact presented to it. That is to say, it represents to itself not only phenomenon that has been, but also phenomenon that may be. It cannot be, it noted, represent to itself phenomenon that assuredly will be except when it is an assured repetition of what is and has been. It has finally the faculty of forecasting new modification which it seeks to construct out of the meeting of which has been and which may be out of the fulfilled possibility and unfulfilled something that is sometimes succeeds in constructing more or less exactly, sometimes fails to realize but usually finds cast into other forms than is forecasted and turned to other ends than it desired or intended. An infinite mind of this character might possibly construct an accidental cosmos of conflicting possibilities, and it might shape it into something shifting, something always transient, something ever uncertain in its drift, neither real or unreal, possessed of no definite end or aim, but also an endless succession of momentary aim leading, since there is no superior directing power of knowledge, eventually no whither. Nihilism or illusionism or some kindred philosophy is the only logical conclusion of such a pure now Nominalism. The cosmos so constructed would be a presentation or reflection of something not itself, but always, and to the end of false presentation, a distorted reflection. All cosmic existence would be a mind struggling to work out fully its imagination, but not succeeding, because they have no imperative basis of self truth over powered and carried forward by the stream of its own past energies. It would be borne onward indeterminately forever without issue unless or until it can either slay itself or fall into an eternal stillness. That trace to its root is nihilism and illusionism, and it is the only wisdom if we suppose that our human mentality or anything at all like it represents the highest cosmic force and the original conception at work in the universe. But the moment we find in the original power of knowledge a higher force than that which is represented by our human mentality, this conception of the universe becomes insufficient and therefore invalid. It has its truth, but it is not the whole truth. It is law of the immediate appearance of the universe, but not of the original truth and ultimate fact. For we perceive behind the action of mind, life, and body something that is not embraced in the stream of force, but embraced and controls it. Something that is not born into the world which it seeks to interpret, but has created in its being a world of which it has to omniscience, something that does not labor perpetually to form something else out of itself while it drifts in the overmastering surge of past energies it can no longer control, but has already in its consciousness a perfect form of itself and is here gradually unfolding it. The world expresses a foreseen truth, obeys a predetermining will, realizes an original formative self vision. It is the growing image of a divine creation. So long as we work only through the mentality governed by appearances, there is something beyond and behind and yet always immanent, can be only an inference or a presence vaguely felt. We perceive a law of cyclic progress and infer an ever increasing perfection of somewhat that is somewhere foreknown. For everywhere we see law founded in self being, and when we penetrate within into the rationale of its process, we find that law is the expression of an innate knowledge, a knowledge inherent in the existence which is expressing itself and implied in the force that expresses it. And the law developed by knowledge so as to allow of progression implies a divinely seen goal towards which the motion is directed. We see too that our reason seeks to emerge out of and dominate the helpless drift of our mentality, and we arrive at the perception the reason is only a messenger, a representative, or a shadow of a greater consciousness beyond itself, which does not need to reason because it is all and knows all that it is. and we can then pass to the inference that this source of reason is identical with the knowledge that acts as law in the world. This knowledge determines its own law sovereignly because it knows what has been, is, and will be, and it knows because it is eternally and infinitely cognizes itself. Being that is infinite consciousness that is omnipotent force, when it makes a world, that is to say, a harmony of itself, its object of consciousness becomes sizable by our thought as a cosmic existence that knows its own truth and realizes in forms that which it knows. But it is only when we cease to reason and go deep into ourselves, in that secrecy where the activity of mind is stilled, that this other consciousness becomes really manifest to us, however imperfectly, owing to our long habit of mental reaction and mental limitation. Then we can know surely in an increasing illumination that which we had uncertainly conceived by the pale and flickering light of reason, knowledge waits seated beyond mind and intellectual reasoning, thrown in the luminous vast of limitable self vision.